see where we're going with it. I'm flying the vessel.
What up, bro? See you over there, Slash?
Wayne Perry was the biggest hitter in the history of the game. Described as the Michael Jordan of the murder game, Wayne had the entire city of DC in complete fear. DC was the original Chirac in the 1980s as America's murder capital and ground zero for the crack epidemic. In a city of cocaine kingpins and cutthroat killers, Wayne Perry stood out as an apex predator, the absolute top of the food chain. Imagine Omar from The Wire and Lamar from BMF all rolled into one. That was Wayne Perry. Police believed Wayne was responsible for 50+ murders, but when they put that number to him, Wayne looked at them and said it was in the triple digits. Now, everyone's seen the classic Hood movie, Paid in Full. But not everyone knows that the movie is missing a huge part of the true story. That part is the DC part. After killing Rich Porter, Alpo would run to DC, where he linked up with Wayne. Alpo and Wayne would then preside over a reign of terror in DC, dropping dozens of bodies across the city, and going to war with some of the most legendary hustlers, including Demencio Benson and Michael Frey Salters. I promise you, this is one video you have to watch. So let's get straight into the story of Wayne Perry, a certified savage. Wayne Anthony Perry was born on November 14, 1962. He grew up on L Street, in an area of southwest DC, known as 203. Wayne excelled at sports from an early age, especially baseball. He was naturally athletic, and would eventually grow to be around 6'3". Wayne would spend his early summers visiting relatives, down in Georgia. He said he'd often get into fights out there, because racism was still a big problem in the South. Racist Southerners would often call him boy, but Wayne wasn't having that, and would fight back. Even from a young age, he instinctively knew that violence was a way of commanding respect. Wayne would start building a reputation for violence from an early age, committing his first murder at only 12 years old. The story goes that, one day, Wayne had been approached by his older cousin. His older cousin was active in the streets, and wanted to take out one of his homeboys, who he believed couldn't be trusted anymore. Wayne was only 12, but agreed to put his cousin's homeboy in the dirt. They figured that, if Wayne got caught, he'd only get a slap on the wrist. He was only a kid, after all. Also, if Wayne did the hit, it would be easier to catch his cousin's homeboy slipping, since he wouldn't expect to get taken out by a little kid. One day, Wayne managed to catch up to the target. He then asked his cousin's homeboy for ice cream. Wayne was only 12, so it didn't seem like an unordinary request. His cousin's homeboy said, "Sure, I'll get you some ice cream." As they went to get the ice cream, his cousin's homeboy started walking in front of Wayne. His guard was down. Wayne saw his opportunity to strike. He pulled out a revolver, aimed it at the back of the target's head, and squeezed the trigger with his eyes closed, before taking off running. Although he got the job done, Wayne would come back to his cousin in tears. He had seen the shell casings still inside the revolver, and was crying, because he believed he had failed the mission. Being only 12, he was too young to realize that the shell casings of bullets remain in the cylinder after you fire a revolver. Think about this for a second. The 12-year-old Wayne wasn't crying because he had just murdered a man. He was only crying because he thought he botched his first hit. It was clear from young, Wayne Perry was built different. Having done his first hit at 12, Wayne would start hustling by 13. Around this time, Wayne's older brother had also given him his now iconic nickname, Silk. Wayne was a fly dresser, charismatic and funny, and got all the girls. He was as smooth as silk. So the nickname stuck. In his early hustling days, Wayne would hang out with the older cats on the block and finesse the gamblers, cheating them with rigged cards and dice. The older cats didn't realize they were being finessed, and would instead bring Wayne around town to gamble at various spots, believing the young boy was good luck. Around this time, Wayne would also start attending Wilson High School. However, it was already clear that school was the least of his priorities. Wayne had 10 toes in the streets, and school and sports no longer mattered. By 16, he had already started going along with the older cats on bank robberies. Legend has it, they would take the bullets out of Wayne's gun, because the older cats believed the young Wayne was too trigger-happy. Bank robberies could get sticky, and Wayne's younger brother would even be killed by police during a bank robbery in 1979. In that same year, Wayne would also be expelled from Wilson after he was blamed for shooting a security guard during a fight there. According to Wayne, he had started a fight with some kids from a rival area inside of the school. One of those other kids then pulled out a gun, began firing, and shot the security guard in the process. But Wayne would end up getting blamed for it. Wayne was then kicked out and sent to Randall. But after beating a high school baseball coach there with a baseball bat, Wayne would be expelled from all DC area schools. He was then ordered by a judge to attend Franklin GED school. However, despite this being his third high school, Wayne couldn't manage to stay out of trouble. According to Wayne, he committed his second murder while at Franklin, after killing a boy who had threatened to rob his chain. With these early acts of violence, the teenage Wayne Perry was beginning to develop a reputation for himself as a violent and rising star in the DC underworld. The DC underworld is different than many other big cities, such as Chicago or LA. Unlike those other cities, DC has never done the whole color banging or set banging thing. The city doesn't have Bloods and Crips, GDs and BDs, or anything of the sort. In DC, what you have are local crews, like the R Street Crew or K Street Crew. These crews are normally based around geographical neighborhoods and extremely violent. However, the DC gangs are only focused on one thing: getting money. But Wayne, he didn't get money like your typical DC hustler. Wayne's bread and butter was murder and fear. Wayne would target the various hustlers and drug dealers in DC for robbery and extortion. The hustlers and drug dealers respected Wayne's murder game, and so, when Wayne would approach them, they often paid whatever he demanded. They figured it was better to feed the wolf than to have him eat you. As a matter of fact, Wayne's murder game was so notorious that DC dealers were known to go out of their way to avoid stunting in flashy cars or rocking iced out jewels. They knew that if Wayne smelled money, it was only a matter of time before DC's Grim Reaper would come knocking. However, Wayne's run would come to a brief pause after he was locked up for a shooting in 1984. The 22-year-old Wayne was walking down the street when another man pulled out a gun and started shooting at him. Acting on instinct, Wayne then pulled out his own gun and returned fire. He would kill his attacker. The only problem was that the shootout had happened right in front of a police officer. Wayne was then arrested. And, despite that cop testifying that Wayne had only acted in self-defense, the court ended up finding him guilty of manslaughter. He was then shipped to the infamous Lorton Youth Center. Lorton was the go-to prison for DC's most serious offenders, until it was closed in 2001. While many kids his age were off to college, Wayne would spend 3 years at Lorton, mixing with some of DC's finest, and getting his own version of a college degree. Wayne would then be released in 1987. However, the world he was released back into was a completely different one. First, Wayne's father had become sick after suffering 2 strokes. He would die shortly after Wayne was released from prison, and Wayne would later say that this devastated him and sent him on a warpath fresh out of prison. Second, in the time that Wayne was gone, the crack epidemic had made its way to DC. Crack had spread through DC like wildfire, and was also making many young hustlers millionaires, seemingly overnight. The city was awash in drug money and an orgy of drug-related violence. Ask anyone who lived in DC in the mid-1980s to early 1990s, and they'll tell you, DC was an absolute war zone. DC was Chiraq before Chiraq was Chiraq. Beginning in 1987, the same year that Wayne got out, DC would break its own murder record for 3 consecutive years. The city would also be crowned the murder capital of America in 1988. To most people, this all was horrifying. But, to someone like Wayne Perry, a man built to thrive in violence and chaos, it was a perfect storm. Wayne was an apex predator, and, if crack now turned DC into a jungle, he was ready to prove that he was king. After his release in 1987, it was back to business for Wayne. However, it wouldn't be long before he made a major connection with one of the most notorious hustlers in the history of the game. A connection that would not only change his life, but many would say, would destroy DC in certain ways. That connection was with Alpo Martinez, the notorious hustler from New York, whose story of murdering his friend, Rich Porter, was portrayed in the classic HUD movie, Paid in Full. Paid in Full may be considered a classic, but it doesn't tell the whole story. There is a major DC part of the story that was completely left out. The DC part of the story was only briefly alluded to in the movie, during the scene when Cameron, who played Alpo, was under interrogation, and said, quote, "I ain't snitching on nobody from Harlem, man. I'll give you a couple cats down in DC, doing they thing out of town." So, let's now look at what really happened down in DC, after Alpo linked up with Wayne. Now, around the time that Wayne was released from prison, Alpo had gone on the run. Alpo had been named in a federal drug indictment out in Virginia, one of the places he had been hustling at. Rich Porter's own cousin, a man named Nathaniel Peanut Watkins, was also named in that indictment. He would tell the FBI that he saw Alpo give a man $300,000 during a drug deal at a Virginia motel. Watkins and the third co-defendant would eventually get life, but Alpo ended up going on the run for the case. He was also wanted for questioning in New York, in relation to several murders out there. Since New York was too hot, Alpo decided to move to DC and set up shop there. Now, it's important to understand something. DC is its own city, with its own politics. Part of what makes DC hustlers, is their shared hatred for out-of-towners, especially New Yorkers like Alpo, who think they can just come into town and set up shop. However, this isn't always the case. For example, some out-of-towners, like Demencio Benson, another legendary New York hustler who set up shop in DC, were actually respected by the locals because of the way they carried themselves. Alpo, on the other hand, came with a reputation as a slimy dude. So, when he arrived in DC and tried to set up shop, Alpo was met with instant smoke. Local gangsters would rob and extort him, and, according to a well-known FBI agent, Alpo was then shot by a crew affiliated to notorious DC gangster, Clef Cobb. Michael Frey Salters, another legendary DC gangster, would also develop a deep hatred for Alpo, and reportedly rob him for multiple bricks. That's just how it was in DC. It didn't matter if you were from New York, California, or even a yardie from Jamaica, it was well known that DC gangsters were giving smoke to a lot of towners. Even in federal prisons, DC gangsters have a reputation as being the most violent and often most hated inmates in the entire system. During the 1980s, the DC Blacks, a prison gang made up of DC gangsters, even went to war with the notorious Aryan Brotherhood in the federal prison system. So, here's Alpo, trying to work his way into DC, and fill in the void that was left behind by Ray Full Edmond, who was DC's biggest cocaine supplier, until he got knocked in 1990. He's getting robbed, extorted, and shot because nobody respects him. This is where Wayne Perry comes into the picture. Alpo knew that he needed someone from the home team on his side. So, he started recruiting. First, he managed to get close to a young gangster, a 15-year-old stick-up kid named Sheldon Watkins. Watkins, also known as Shorty Pop, was notorious in DC, a street legend in his own right. Alpo would then get Wayne Perry on his team. The story goes that Wayne had gotten locked up once again and was being held on a $10,000 bail. However, nobody wanted to bail him out. The reason being that both the civilians and gangsters in DC could all breathe easier now that Wayne was behind bars. Alpo saw this as an opportunity to get close to Wayne. He then posted Wayne's $10,000 bail when nobody else would. This simple act would eventually lead to the formation of one of the bloodiest criminal organizations in DC history. The police's official name for this new organization was the Martinez Drug Organization. Alpo was the moneymaker, the hustler with the bankroll, and the man with the connects. Wayne was the enforcer, the bodyguard, and the contract hitman who had DC in fear. Alpo would feed Wayne, and, in return, Wayne would keep the wolves from Alpo's door, and keep his name ringing in the streets. Their relationship was the definition of an unholy alliance. The Martinez drug operation operated in DC, New York, Virginia, and Ohio. A later federal indictment would state that Alpo had moved over 500 keys of coke into DC during the lifetime of the organization. Wayne Perry would become the head of Alpo's security team, overseeing a squad of in-house killers, all trained to go. Anytime someone needed to be put in the dirt, Alpo would give the order to Wayne, and then either Wayne, or one of his underlings, would get the job done. Wayne's approach to contract killing has become the topic of local legend. But his strategy was simple. First, Wayne did his homework. If Alpo put someone on the hit list, Wayne would find out who they were, where they stayed at, their routine, and everything else a killer needed to know, in order to get the job done quickly, and professionally. He did this so well, that people would say Wayne literally stalked his victims. Rumors would go as far as saying that, if Wayne wanted you, he would sleep in your front yard, just waiting for you. Wayne's dedication to the murder game was unparalleled. After Wayne had done his homework and clocked you, he would strike in a way that even the most paranoid and cautious hustlers couldn't have ever seen coming. Some even described him like a ghost. You could never pinpoint exactly where Wayne was. He would just pop up out of nowhere and surprise the hell out of you. Even the police admitted that they didn't know Wayne's address until months after they arrested him for the final time. Wayne would switch up addresses and locations, often staying at random hotels or motels for the night. Wayne also wasn't loud. He wouldn't argue with you, give you a chance to put your guard up, and strike first. He was calm and collected. You would never see it coming. Wayne would do his homework on you, catch you slipping, and then straight rock you to sleep. Wayne and his crew of enforcers would commit dozens of murders between the period of 1987 and 1992. Police pegged Wayne's personal body count at 50+ bodies. However, they would put this number to Wayne during a later police interview, asking him to confirm whether it was true. Wayne looked at them, and then said, it was more like 100+ bodies. This might sound like exaggeration, but, as we'll see, Wayne was dropping bodies left and right, like it wasn't a thing. The level of savagery was almost unbelievable, and often sounded like a scene out of a Hollywood movie. Let's now take a look at exactly what happened after Wayne and Alpo linked up, and the absolute bloodbath that followed in DC. So there were 3 reasons why Wayne would kill. First, was business. If Alpo needed to take out a competitor, or give an overdue notice to a late customer, Wayne would get them gone. The second reason was to protect the crew from the police. This meant killing anyone Wayne thought was snitching. The thing was, though, that Wayne really didn't need any sort of confirmation that someone was a snitch. No paperwork, or nothing. To Wayne, just the mere suspicion that someone was snitching meant they needed to be put in the dirt. And it wouldn't take much to trigger that suspicion. If you so much as asked too many questions, you could be snitching. And the last reason Wayne would kill was if it was personal. If you were on Wayne's good side and did what he expected of you, you could breathe a little easy. But if you did anything to make Wayne feel like you double-crossed him or didn't live up to his expectations, he would take it personal and show you no mercy. One of the first known persons who Wayne killed for Alpo was a man named David Short. Short went by the nickname Duke and was murdered in Maryland in 1989. Alpo believed that he was planning to rip him off for drugs and coke and even possibly try to kill him. So Alpo put Wayne on him. Wayne and Shorty Pop then took him out. Next, Alpo ordered the murder of a man named James Hinson. Hinson, also known as Froggy, was killed by Wayne in 1990 for simply failing to pay a drug debt. His murder was also witnessed by a female friend of his, named Alveda Hopkins. Hopkins would also herself be later murdered by Wayne and his hitters, in order to tie up so-called loose ends. After Hinson, Alpo would order one of the most infamous murders, when he told Wayne to take out the legendary New York hustler, Demencio Benson. Let's take a second to consider what happened. So, Demencio is considered a legend in New York. He was a close friend of legends, like Mike Tyson and Rich Porter. Till this very day, he continues to be talked about as a man of respect, who is well loved and sorely missed. Demencio was one of many New York hustlers who moved into DC in the 1980s. He would set up shop in one of DC's most notorious housing projects, known as Montana Terrace, even being given the nickname Montana as a result. Now, to a hustler, Montana Terrace was considered prime real estate, like the Trump Tower of the dope game. It was also home to another DC legend, the feared hitman, known as Teflon Sean. Teflon Sean would say in an interview that Montana Terrace was such good real estate that it was capable of pumping 1 kilo of coke per day. This is all to say that Demencio was making big money out in DC, and Alpo likely knew about it and wasn't too happy. However, Demencio had developed clear tensions with Alpo over a woman, that woman being Alpo's wife. Demencio had some sort of relationship with her, his son later saying that she was only a friend of his father's. However, Demencio had gotten into an argument with her, words were exchanged, and offenses were taken. She then reportedly relayed this to Alpo, telling him that Demencio had disrespected her. Like I said, Alpo already had a reason to hate on Demencio. They were both New Yorkers, but it seemed like only Demencio had managed to get love and respect out in DC. But, with Demencio now disrespecting his wife, Alpo was charged up. Initially, Demencio and Alpo appeared to have talked out the situation. Demencio was always known for being diplomatic, and the two seemed to have squashed the beef. Alpo then invited Demencio out to a basketball tournament, as a show of good faith, showing that they had smoothed things over. Demencio thought nothing of it, and agreed to come. When Demencio later showed up at the tournament, he spotted Alpo. Alpo, Wayne, and the rest of their crew were all there. As Alpo and Demencio were shaking hands, Alpo gave a head nod in Wayne's direction. This was Alpo's signal to send in a shooter. It was a setup. Shorty Pop then ran up with a gun and executed Demencio, in full view of thousands of stunned onlookers. According to Demencio's son, Alpo would even send a bouquet of flowers to their family after the shooting. He did this in order to throw off any suspicion that it was him who was behind the murder. Alpo was the real definition of a slime, a real-life bishop from Juice. He already double-crossed Rich Porter, and now he did the same to Demencio. Despite thousands of people being in attendance at the tournament, police couldn't find a single person who was willing to talk. Everyone knew who did it, but Wayne's reputation had already put the fear of God into them. After killing Demencio, Alpo and Wayne would take out another street legend, this time from the DC side. Michael Frey Salters was a legend in the DC drug game. He was like the mayor of DC. This meant that, if local gangsters started having problems with each other, they would sometimes come to Salters and ask him to mediate. It also meant that Salters loved DC and despised out-of-towners, especially Alpo. Alpo knew this, and was afraid that Salters was going to take him out. At the same time, it's reported that Salters also had a contract out on Wayne. Salters figured, if he took out Wayne, it would leave Alpo unprotected, and he could easily then either kill or extort him. So, Alpo and Wayne both had a reason to want Salters gone. Initially, Wayne set out to kill Salters himself. But Wayne wasn't able to track Salters down, and they had to switch up their strategy. Instead, they ended up taking a page out of Alpo's book. Alpo reached out to a man in Salters' crew, named Michael Jackson. He offered Jackson $9,000 cash and a half-brick of coke in exchange for double-crossing Salters and killing him. Jackson accepted the offer. On July 16, 1991, Michael Frey Salters was driving through northwest DC when his car was sprayed with gunfire. Salters was hit 6 times and would later be pronounced dead at the Washington Hospital Center only hours later. In separate interviews, both Alpo and Wayne would later admit that Michael Jackson was the shooter. But Wayne, he wouldn't only kill people in the game. The next murder attributed to him would actually be the murder of a young woman named Evelyn Carter. The story of what happened is almost unbelievable. The story goes that after Michael Frey Salters was killed, Evelyn Carter had attended his funeral and was telling people there that Wayne and Alpo were responsible. Wayne thought she was snitching and therefore wanted her gone. However, according to a well-known FBI agent, there was a different reason why Wayne wanted her dead. Carter was reportedly accustomed to life in the fast lane and would date various hustlers and drug dealers across DC. Wayne tried to mess with her, but she reportedly rejected him. That made Wayne angry and was reportedly the real reason he wanted to put her in the dirt. But it's unclear which of these two stories was the true motive. Either way, Wayne wanted Carter gone. Rather than do it himself, he ordered one of his soldiers to carry out the hit. Thomas Dozier had done time with Wayne back in Lawton. But Wayne had since developed worries about Dozier. So Wayne told Dozier to do the hit as a way of testing him. One day, Carter went to see a Keith Sweat concert at Constitution Hall, 2 blocks away from the White House. After the show rounded up and she was leaving, Dozier shot her twice in the chest. Carter fell to the floor and started bleeding out. Dozier lingered around for a bit before an ambulance came and scared him off. Carter was rushed to a local hospital where she died shortly after. Dozier then reported back to Wayne and told him the job was done. But when he told Wayne the details of what happened, Wayne flipped out. "What do you mean, you killed her? You can only kill somebody if you shoot them in the head," Wayne yelled at Dozier. Then, Wayne pulled out a gun and shot a random stranger in the head who happened to be on a nearby payphone. "That's how you kill someone," Wayne then told Dozier. This story may sound unbelievable, but it was confirmed to be true by a well-known FBI agent who worked the case and who also knew Wayne Perry. It just goes to show how easy it was for Wayne to kill. The next victim would also be a woman who would similarly be killed for no reason. A woman named Yolanda Burley had met Wayne somewhere. They got to talking, having a conversation, as people normally do. However, Burley then began asking Wayne about who he was and what he did for a living. Again, nothing unusual. But Burley had unknowingly raised Wayne's suspicions. Why was she asking so many questions? She must have been a snitch. Wayne, Thomas Dozier, and another associate then later stabbed and shot her to death. But the killing wouldn't stop there. Remember James Hinson, the man Wayne gunned down in 1990 for failing to pay a drug debt to Alpo. Hinson's friend, Alveda Hopkins, had witnessed the murder and decided to cooperate with police to lock up her friend's killer. When Wayne found out, he knew she had to go. Wayne then got one of his underlings to kidnap her. They caught her walking down the street, knocked her unconscious, and threw her in a van. When she woke up, she realized she was in a vehicle with the DC Grim Reaper. She was paralyzed with fear. According to Alpo, Wayne then threw in a tape, bumping the NWA song, "A Bitch is a Bitch." With the song blaring in the background, Wayne then proceeded to stab Hopkins numerous times, before eventually shooting her to death. The group then dumped her body on Interstate 295. Wayne and Alpo were personally responsible for contributing to DC's skyrocketing murder rate in the 1980s and 90s. But they didn't stick to just killing outsiders. They also internally cleansed members of their own organization. Gary Terrell, aka Big Head Gary, was one of Alpo's close friends in DC and a member of the Martinez drug organization. Gary was also a killer. He was reportedly the man responsible for murdering both Rich Porter and legendary DC gangster Andre Tank Johnson. Johnson, who was commonly referred to as Dre, had regularly done business with Alpo. A later federal indictment would even say that Alpo had supplied Dre with up to 250 bricks of coke. However, Dre had begun having an affair with Big Head Gary's baby mama. It caused tensions, which then led to a meeting, with Dre giving his word that the affair would stop. But after Dre started ignoring Gary's baby mama, she became jealous and put out a lie that she was pregnant by him. This infuriated Gary, who wrongly believed that Dre didn't honor his word that he would stop messing with Gary's baby mama. So, the next time Dre went to re-up from Alpo, he ended up getting robbed and shot dead. Alpo would blame Gary for Dre's murder. However, Dre's loyal friend and right-hand man, legendary gangster Evers the Christ, said he believed Alpo was really behind it. Evers the Christ would develop a lifelong hatred for Alpo and spend many years trying to track him down because of this. However, just like Rich Porter, Alpo would end up turning on his very close friend Gary as well. Alpo had come to believe that Gary was going to branch off and start working with another connect. Alpo had been supplying Gary for a while, a federal indictment pegging the amount at nearly 350 bricks. Alpo also worried that Gary may rip him off before switching plugs. He told Wayne that Gary had to go. And, once again, they took a page out of Alpo's book and set Gary up for a double cross. So, one day they called Gary. They told him that they were sliding on and up and to come. Gary agreed because, like I said, he wasn't a stranger to the gunplay. They then picked him up in a van, the same MPV van that they had earlier murdered Alveda Hopkins in. Alpo was driving, and Wayne was in the back seat, sitting next to Gary. After driving for some distance, Wayne shot Gary in the torso and head, killing him. They then stripped him and dumped his naked body in Rock Creek Park. The reason they stripped him naked was to make it look like a sex crime in order to throw off detectives. They then tried to clean up the van because Gary had left behind a bloody mess. However, Gary's fingerprints and blood were later found in the van, and unique fibers from the van's carpet would also be found on his body. All of these murders happened in less than a 3-year time period. And these were only the murders that the police had sufficient evidence for. Needless to say, there were definitely more than reported. By late 1991, it became clear that Wayne and Alpo were spinning out of control, murdering everything from left to right. On November 7, 1991, Alpo's run would come to an end after he was arrested by police in Southeast DC. A Washington Post article would then report that, at his first court appearance, Alpo, quote, sniffed loudly as tears welled up in his eyes. Alpo was crying because he knew it was over. The government pressed him to snitch, but he initially refused. His lawyer then told him that he was facing either the death penalty or the rest of his natural life in jail. He further said that the government was willing to make a deal and that the person they really wanted was Wayne. The same Wayne that had risked his own life and freedom to protect Alpo all these years. The same Wayne who many DC gangsters told to be cautious of Alpo because he couldn't be trusted. However, Alpo wasn't concerned with Wayne, he only cared about himself. He had no problem snaking Rich Porter, Demencio, and the countless other people he did dirty. So, in order to save himself, Alpo turned rat and agreed to give up Wayne in exchange for a lighter sentence. Alpo would plead to 14 murders and numerous drug trafficking charges before being sentenced to 35 years in prison. He would end up serving 25 years of that sentence before being released in 2015 and immediately put into the Witness Protection Program. In the meantime, Wayne had been picked up on a minor charge in Maryland and held in a local jail. The government was preparing an indictment against him and wanted him behind bars while they secured their witnesses and got their ducks in order. While in custody on that minor charge, Wayne would be visited by legendary DC hitman, Teflon Sean. Wayne believed that his soldier, Thomas Dozier, was snitching and wanted him gone. They came up with a plan straight out of Alpo's playbook. Rather than kill Dozier themselves, they figured it would be easier to have someone else do it for them. The someone else was Daryl Pucci Salters, the nephew of the late Michael Frey Salters. Wayne and Teflon Sean put out a rumor that Dozier was responsible for Salters' murder, hoping it would provoke his nephew, Pucci, to get revenge. Pucci would bite the bait. Days after hearing the rumor that Dozier was responsible for his beloved uncle's death, Pucci went to the apartment complex where Dozier lived and pumped 50 bullets from an assault rifle into him. However, taking Dozier out couldn't stop what was coming. Wayne, Michael Jackson, and another associate named Tyrone Price would be hit with a 27-count indictment in 1993. The indictment would link Wayne to 8 murders, allegedly committed on behalf of the Martinez drug organization. The indictment would even read, quote, "These defendants allegedly served as hitmen to eliminate witnesses, assassinate rival drug dealers, and murder disloyal gang members. The organization used these defendants as paid executioners to establish their drug organization in Washington and to eliminate those who threatened its operations." Federal prosecutors considered asking for the death penalty, which hadn't been carried out in DC since 1971. However, because it was DC, they ultimately decided against it. In 1994, the now 32-year-old Wayne pled guilty to 5 murders. He would admit to killing Demencio, Evelyn Carter, Yolanda Burley, Alveda Hopkins, and Big Head Gary, and was sentenced to 5 consecutive life sentences, without the possibility of parole, guaranteeing he'd die in prison. The level of death and destruction Wayne was responsible for is unimaginable. To a normal person, Wayne is an absolute monster who deserves to never get out of prison. However, in the streets, where right and wrong don't exist, only strength and weakness, Wayne remains a legend till this very day. He single-handedly had one of America's most violent cities in absolute terror. Decades later, we can still hear him getting shouted out by rappers, from Jay-Z to Boosie.